Tonight, we are joined by Nicholas Thompson, here to celebrate his new book, The Running Ground, A Father, a Son, and the Simplest of Sports. This isn't just a story about running. It's about pain and endurance, about what we inherit from our parents and what we choose to carry forward. It's about what happens when we measure distance, not in miles, but in meaning. In short, it's a story about being alive. Thompson writes about running as a kind of inheritance, something passed from father to son, carrying both pain and grace. The Running Ground is part memoir, part meditation, and a reminder that sometimes movement is how we make peace with stillness. Nicholas Thompson is the CEO of The Atlantic, which has won the National Magazine Award for General Excellence 3 years in a row. Before that, he led Wired as editor-in-chief and worked as an editor at The New Yorker. He's also, quite literally, record-breaking. In 2021, he set the American record for men 45 and over in the 50K, and in 2025 became the top-ranked runner in the world for his age group in the 50-mile. He lives in Brooklyn with his wife and 3 sons. He'll be in conversation tonight with James Fallows, a longtime Atlantic writer and one of journalism's most trusted voices. He's the author of 12 books, including National Defense, which won the American Book Award, and Our Towns, which was co-written with his wife, Deborah, and the basis for the HBO documentary of the same name. Before his decades in journalism, Fallows served as President Jimmy Carter's chief White House speechwriter. And you know what the Grateful Dead say, long distance runner, what are you standing there for? Get up, get out of the door. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Nicholas Thompson and James Fallows.
This is great. This is great. This is a great venue, a great crowd, a great discussion, a wonderful book, which we'll talk about. So you can always tell if somebody has paid attention to a book when they're reading it in gallery proofs. I have, more places dog-eared. It's a particular pleasure in many, many ways to join here. And Nick and I've known you. Were you a teenager when we first met? Maybe you were 20 or so.
I might have been 20, yeah.
The circumstances in brief is...
We don't have to go into the circumstances, Jim.
It was my first day as editor of U.S. News and World Report, and a very sort of fervent student leader group came in to demand that the college rankings be cleaned up. They were doing the Lord's work, but on that first day, I tried to be as gracious as I could. I eventually got fired because I tried to clean them up, but it's good to see you again.
I met Jim while picketing him.
And we've crossed paths many times. I worked at the Washington Monthly for my first magazine job, as did Nick. Yep. When Nick was the editor of Wired, he edited a piece I wrote for them. And I never wrote for you at the New Yorker, but things are tough.
Should have.
We share experience in Ghana. We shared Legal Affairs. Legal Affairs was a wonderful magazine based in New Haven, where Nick worked for 2 years. It was great. And you've heard about Nick's famous world-recognized prowess as a marathon runner. I used to run marathons, and what was my best time? I told you a little while ago. It was
3:02, which is awesome.
3:02. I figured I would never get any faster than that. That was at the Marine Corps Marathon. So I'm going to just say a word more before turning things over mainly to Nick. There's a category of book that I think of where people go into great depth about something particular and draw the global from that. I spent a lot of my life being interested in aviation. There's a whole category of books in that realm. William Languish, our lamented mutual friend, wrote many wonderful books, including Inside the Sky, which is what you learn about life by learning aviation. Beryl Markham's West with the Sun, and West with the Night. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, Lives of Sail, etc. My wife, Deb's Dreaming in Chinese. Deb is over here, which is what you learn about China by learning Chinese language. So these are all ways to have the universal in the particular. And Nick's book is that way about running. It has a lot about running. I know, how many people here are runners?
Oh my God.
And Nick says in the preface of the book that running is the simplest of sports. But if we look closely at it, it can teach us about the hardest things in life. And that's what Nick's book covers. It goes into running, of course, and runners with a number of particular profiles, which we'll talk, the subject of one of whom is here. It's about your father and your grandfathers and your sons and your life and what you have learned from your particular passions about family relations. It's about failure and success, about pain and all the rest. Let me just start by asking you, Nick, about the structure of this book. It has many overlapping, intersecting timelines.
Yeah.
Describe those and why you decided to write it this way.
So this was, thank you. That's a very smart journalistic question. It's actually a very hard question. So the book has really 4 components. There's my life story. There's my father's life story. There's the story of 5 different characters who teach you about pain, big issues in life through running, who kind of exemplify to the extreme some of the lessons I've pulled from running from my own life. And then there's the physiology of the sport and what I've learned about it as I've gone, right? So there are 4 things. And I worked at the New Yorker, so I'm biologically programmed to make things chronological. And when I went into my job interview with the New Yorker, I think it was Steve Call who said, there are lots of ways you can start the first draft of a New Yorker piece, and there's one way it can run, which is chronological. But I had this real problem because the chronologies don't map. And you can't, if I were to do it all chronologically, then I would have to start with my father's life up to my birth. And every reader would put it down because it's not about my father's life. My father's perhaps more interesting than me, but it can't work that way. And you'd have to have the runners pop in. And so then I initially thought, I'll structure it like a marathon. I'll make the beginning, what you learn at the start of a marathon, and I'll sort of pop the runners in and out. And eventually I kind of worked through 3 or 4 different structural ideas, and then I came up with, I think, a pretty good solution, which is that I mapped my father's life thematically to mine. So first this is an idea that came to me from this wonderful woman, Larissa McFarquhar, who read an early draft, and she was like, you need to make people understand what you think when you run, and you have to do that at the beginning. And so I chose a race, and I went through the thought process of everything that happened in that race. It was the 2007 New York Marathon. Then, that's the beginning. Then I take my father's life and my life, but I kind of map them in parallel, like his time at Andover, my time at Andover, his time at Stanford, my time at Stanford. And then I bring the different characters in when they intersect with my life. So these 5 people who I write about, I bring them in at moments where, this is actually an idea that Corby Kummer had, which is that I had sort of parceled them out, but have them as discrete chapters. And so the first one is this woman, Bobby Gibb. She's the first woman to run the Boston Marathon. She has this beautiful way of running. She enters the narrative at my high school graduation, where she's in the audience and my drunken father storms the stage when I win an award. And so then we cut back and we tell Bobby's life. So that's the structure of the book. And I don't know, all I can say is it's way better than all the other structures I tried. So it either works or it doesn't, but it was a really hard puzzle piece, and I had all kinds of docs to put it together, and I worked so hard to make. I genuinely believe that if things flow chronologically, I worked really hard to make it so that you can read this book in one sitting, or you can read this book quickly. And one way to do that is to make sure that things flow, both chapter level, paragraph level, sentence level.
So I'm going to have another sort of diversion here. Nick, I called out a minute ago my wife, Deb. Nick just called out our editor, Corby Kummer. And among the things that have connected us, Corby was my editor for many years at The Atlantic, and you've called him out as the editor of this book. And we'll have other call-outs. And Rafe Segalin, we worked with, both of us. So,
Yes.
so thank you all.
Bless them both.
So while your book is about running, one could be forgiven for thinking that it's really about your father. And for people who don't know, tell the story of who your father was and why the ups and the downs of his life, what they meant to you and why they're connected with running.
So one of the ways this book started is that after my father died, I was flying back and he lived in the Philippines. And my children hadn't really known him, and so I started writing about what he had meant to me. And I thought I would just write them a short letter. It was something that, anyway, I just wanted to write them a letter that they would get when they were 21. And I started typing, and then by the time the plane lands, I've written like 6,000 words. I'm like, there's tears all over the keyboard, right? It was a very emotional experience. So my dad, he grows up mostly in Oklahoma, and he's the son of this sort of overbearing minister, Golden Gloves boxing champion. And my dad doesn't really fit in. My dad doesn't want to play sports with him. He doesn't want to. It's a very unhappy family, and my grandfather resigns his job at 40. And my dad is very enterprising, very smart, very committed. He rides horseback, delivers newspapers, earns money, and then gets a scholarship to Phillips Academy Andover, which he reads about in a magazine, is like, I'm out. and says, "Hey, Dad, I'm out." And Dad says, "What are you talking about? Never heard of the school. You're not leaving." He's like, "Yeah, I'm leaving. I'm taking the train." And his father's like, "Well, you don't have enough money." He's like, "Yep, I got it from my horseback riding. I'm going to pay the last food bills and I'm gone." So he goes to Andover. Then he gets a scholarship to Stanford. Then he wins a Rhodes Scholarship. And he's like profiled in Life magazine. There's a big picture, Scotty Thompson, right? He introduces Richard Nixon on stage, introduces John Kennedy, who jokes this guy's gonna be the next president. I got his Rhodes Scholar letters of recommendation. Like, this is the best student we've had at Stanford since Herbert Hoover, right? The guy is incredible. Comes back, he marries my mother. My mother comes in this prominent DC family. And so my dad is like on track.
Let's pause there just to mention the prominent DC family.
So when they're married, my grandfather was then Undersecretary of Defense, Paul Nitze. And so he marries into the Nitze clan. So he's this guy who's come from Oklahoma and he's made it, right? And he's gonna be senator, he's gonna be president, he's gonna be whatever he wants to be. But then it kind of comes uncorked, and he starts to drink a little too much, and he goes into academia, but it doesn't really suit his personality. He doesn't publish books that quite make it, and he's brilliant and exciting. Everybody loves him, and I see some of his friends in the audience here. Like, everyone loves this man. He is so interesting. But he's drunk all the time, and he's not getting his work done. And then he starts to realize he's gay, right? So he realizes that after I come around, thankfully. He comes out of the closet and sort of to himself. It's a sort of a complicated process in this era. But he leaves my mother, comes out of the closet, moves to DuPont Circle in 1981, 1982. And this is when he starts running, runs the 1982 New York Marathon. And then from there, his life is this cauldron, right? In some ways, he's a civil rights pioneer. He is, I believe, slightly historically disputed, but the first openly gay presidential appointee, certainly the first openly gay Republican presidential appointee when he works at the Peace Institute. He writes a memoir, but he also just burns down every social structure. He goes to legal war with hundreds of people. He goes bankrupt. He owes hundreds of thousands of dollars on his taxes, and he has a terrible sex addiction, right? And so, you know, he's bringing back prostitutes to the house. He's bringing back prostitutes to my house when he comes and visits. It's chaos, right? It's madness. You know, he's sleeping with hundreds of men during the course of a year, and he ends up setting up this house in Bali, which is beautiful. But as far as I could tell, the business model was Americans coming to sleep with the gardeners, right? And so he's a very complicated man. But he and I emailed every single day. Right? And he loved me dearly, and he, you know, he knew the things I wanted in life, and he wanted them absolutely completely for me, right? He, like, if he were here, he would want this reading to go really well, and he would want everyone to buy a book, and he would want this book to be a bestseller, and he would love it. So, you know, he's a complicated guy who, you know, would literally threaten suicide to blackmail me for like $150 to pay a hooker in Singapore, right? Like, that's tough stuff as a son. But he also loved me dearly, and so part of my, you know, what I wrote in that letter to my kids is that part of who I am is an effort to take some things from them and an effort to try to like stay disciplined in life so that I'm not going to end up exactly like that, but so that I don't lose control of things when I'm older.
If your father were here now to read the book, would any of your judgments or portrayals of him surprise him?
I don't think so. He told me, I mean, he was very frank. He wrote, I quoted in the book, but he said, you know, someday you should write memoirs. And like, I know the portrayal of me is going to be really hard, but you should do it. You know, it wasn't like he hid any of this stuff. You know, he had an unpublished memoir that I used as a source. And like the book is very sweet. It's dedicated to my children. And I'm like, oh, wow, it's lovely. That's a book. It's my father wrote a memoir. It's dedicated to my children. Page 4 is about the different penis sizes of different races, right? Like, this guy it's not like he's hiding the problems.
So since this is, just for context here in D.C., your father was in that sort of cadre of foreign policy experts. Jim Woolsey was in the same class at Stanford, in the same class of Rhodes Scholars. Paul Wolfowitz was a rival for various positions, some others of that era. If your father had come out on top of the DC-based greasy pole competition with the likes of them, what would have been different, do you think?
Well, it's an interesting question.
You can tell the Wolfowitz story. Yeah.
Well, there's a very interesting moment where prior to my father coming out, like once my father came out, there was going to be a cap on how high he could rise. This is 1980s DC, and he's a, you know, civil rights are great and people, were becoming more open to gay people, but it was 1980s DC. But had I found a document, or somebody sent me a document while I was working on this book, and it showed the list of people who were going to run the policy planning staff. It's a great job, right, in the Ronald Reagan State Department. And my dad was listed number 1, but then above it, like, there's a little pencil mark, and it crossed him off and put Paul Wolfowitz, right? And Wolfowitz gets the job and goes off, and we get the Iraq War. And what I don't know is if my dad had truly succeeded with the ambitions that he wanted, would he have, kept his sexuality bottled up? Right? I have no idea. Eventually, it was too powerful a force to bottle up. Eventually, it would have uncorked. But I think that I think if he had gotten that job, I think he probably would have stayed in the closet longer, to be honest. And then who knows what happens in the rest of his life.
There's one other aspect about your dad's public life I want to mention. Can you tell the story of Denny Hansen and why his fate was so important to your father?
I'm glad you asked this. So I've done, 25, 30 interviews for podcasts for this book, and no one has asked about this yet, right? But it's a pretty important part. So Roger, Denny Hansen, is in some ways my father's twin. He's maybe 5 years older, and he's a student at Yale, wins a Rhodes Scholarship. He's his graduation is photographed by Life magazine, right? And put on the cover of Life magazine, just like my dad, right? The 2 college kids who were profiled in Life magazine, Roger Hansen and my father. But then Hansen, much like my father, struggles, right? He goes into academia, and again, like my dad, doesn't really prosper. And then his friends are like, this guy's supposed to be the, senator. Why is he bickering about office assignments in the poli-sci department, right? And he gets a little depressed and he struggles. And then also, like my father, he realizes he's gay. And he doesn't come to terms with it as well as my dad does, or he doesn't come to it as clearly as my dad does. And so he continues to maintain the facade of being straight. In fact, if you read Calvin Trillin's book about him, Remembering Denny, there's very little about his sexuality. Whereas any book that anybody wrote about my dad, there'd be a lot about his sexuality. And so Roger Hansen and my dad sort of become close, and they bond over this shared experience, over being the shining students of the 50s and 60s America who didn't fulfill their promise, went into academia, kind of struggled, have various physical pains, and are dealing with being gay. And then my father has a house in Rehoboth. And when I'm about, and I go down there a lot with him, and when I'm about 15 years old, Roger Hansen asks to borrow the house for the weekend. And my dad says, sure, And then Hansen fills his car with pillows, puts a brick on the gas pedal and kills himself. And, he's found face down in the garage of my dad's house. And my dad just had this, I don't know why Roger Hansen chose to kill himself in his friend's garage. I don't know what he was trying to symbolize. I don't know whether there is no note, there's no message, there's nothing in Trillin's book. But my dad afterwards it would come, as I said, I emailed my dad, every day for most of our lives. It comes up all the time about my dad's fear of becoming Roger Hansen. And in some ways, I think my dad's the love that dare not speak its name will become the love that will not shut up, right? My dad, his insistence on being, outrageously open about his sexuality and bringing his sexuality into every conversation was in part a reaction and feeling like I am not going to be closeted because I'm going to not let what happened to Roger Hansen happen to me. I think that was part of what caused it. And this made my father extremely worried about becoming depressed and just following the same path as Hansen. It was a very deep movement. And I traced it back. As part as I was making these chronological maps, it was the same week I started running, right? And in some ways, this weird trajectory that I get on when I get cut from the JV2 basketball team when I'm a 15-year-old in high school is the same week that Roger Hansen kills himself in my father's garage.
I mentioned before that your book is about running, and it's also about your father. It's also about what success and enoughness means. I mean, one of your grandfathers was Paul Nitze, whom everyone who has studied American foreign policy knows. The other was the person who went to the University of Redlands in my hometown and then went to Oklahoma and had his troubles. There's your father, who was gloriously successful. There is you, who is gloriously successful. What you write a lot about enoughness in success and the weight of expectation. You tell a story about when you feel the weight of expectation came somewhat off you, but it still must be there. You're going to run a marathon in a few days. You are expecting to be able to perform there. You're running a major magazine right now. Tell us how you think about the family heritage of success, of enoughness, when you can say, I've done it.
Well, I don't know I don't know the answer to that. You know, my grandfather, I mean, interestingly, so my grandfather, Paul Nitze, there was never enough, right? My grandfather, Paul Nitze, worked for every president from Franklin Roosevelt to George Bush, right? And he's fired by something like 7 of them, right? And like comes back and works his way up. It's the most admirable professional story you can possibly imagine. He's constantly getting fired and then constantly working his way back up and constantly.
And you wrote a great book about him.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, it's called The Hawk and the Dove, and it's about him and George Kennan. But what's amazing is he gets fired by Bush at age 83, right? 83. You'd think that would be enough. You'd think he'd be done, right? What does he do? He like leaks a story to the Washington Post about how James Baker's a terrible guy, right? And like tries to get even with the guy who fired him so he can get back in with whoever the replacement is if he can get Baker out of his job. Like, there wasn't a moment. My other grandfather, you know, my father's father, you know, he comes from nothing, right? He like has to walk 7 miles through the Arizona desert to get to high school. You know, his family's like bootleggers, homesteaders, you know, they're, you know, pioneers out on the West, but they're like baggage carriers out for like Lewis and Clark, right? Like his family is, you know, they build their own houses out in the desert. And that grandfather, you know, he thinks he's part Native American. It doesn't seem to be true based on the genetics, but he believes he's part Native American. So he becomes a Native American missionary, goes to Bacone University in Oklahoma, becomes the president of the university, right, when my father's living there, like works his way up, loses that job due to like a family sex scandal, and then like spends the rest of his life like trying to catch up and get better jobs and become a minister again and get some job. And my dad says that the hardest moment, my father wrote that the hardest moment in his life was understanding that his father was competitive with him and that my grandfather was competitive with my dad, and as my dad was like winning the Rhodes Scholarship and doing really well, my grandfather was on the way down, and like my grandfather believed there was only enough success for a given amount of success for the two of them. So I don't know, certainly like the Atlantic could do a lot better. I'm trying to make the Atlantic go a lot better. That's what I'm going to do, Jim. We're going to hire more writers. I don't think Jeff Goldberg has hired enough writers in the last 3 months, and my job is to get him more money so we can hire more writers. That's all I want, Jim. That's how I'm going to answer that question more quickly.
So I have an anecdote from your book and then a follow-on question. The anecdote is, during the time that one of your grandfathers was in college at the University of Redlands, he came in second in some debate championship for collegians to whom?
Richard Milhouse Nixon.
Whittier College, traditional rival.
And his topic was technology in the machine age, 1931. It's hilarious.
So you said that you write a lot in your book about your father being competitive with his father. Was your father ever competitive with you? Or
no,
yeah.
Absolutely not. Never, not 1%. And God bless him for that. It is so hard in life to have someone who, like, your best friend might not want you to succeed at something, maybe like 1%, right? Like maybe they'll be happy for you, maybe they'll express it, but sometimes they don't, right? Right? And like, maybe like your brother is like a little resentful, right? And like, you have kids, right? And you watch and like things go really well for one and the brothers cheer, but like, maybe it would have been better if they'd won 4-1 instead of 5-1, right? And to have someone who's 100% always unquestioning, like fully supportive, that's amazing. And that's what I had in my dad.
So to take this inevitably to the next generation, you have 3 sons.
Yes.
Who are of age to be able to read things about themselves and about their father and about their lineage. How do you think about that? How did you prepare them for this book?
My eldest son, who's 17, is very mature, very very sophisticated. He was actually, I think, the first reader. And like he always just would read all of my stuff. He read my Wired essays. He's just loved reading. And I was like, Ellis, you want to read this? And he's like, sure. He comes out the next day. He's like, Dad, I learned a lot of interesting things about my family. The two younger ones are 15 and 11, and they read it more recently, like in the last 6 months. The one thing that was hard is the 11-year-old. There's a chapter. There's a lot in the book about an experience I had at 30 where I get cancer, and it affects the trajectory of my running life in very significant ways. And the 11-year-old came to my wife, and he's like, "I didn't know Dad had cancer," right? And it was like, "Oh wait, we didn't tell you that. Like we've told you about your grandfather. You know the general trajectory of the book. You know the arc of the book. But that like kind of hit him hard, right? You don't know how an 11-year-old is going to feel about things."
And how do you think, so Deb and I have two sons who have two wonderful wives. They each have one wonderful wife. And they have, and they have among them 6 wonderful grandchildren. Our sons are fabulous, talented, brilliant people. They do entirely different things from what their parents do. How do you think about the shadow, the example, the encouragement that you personally cast on your sons' sense of their own, whether they are doing enough, whether they are good enough in the years to come?
It's so hard because you don't want to put too much pressure on them. You don't want to, my view is you try to set an example for how to be a good, kind, ethical person, right? You treat people well, you treat people with generosity, you try to model that behavior. And then you support your kids in whatever they do, right? And so if they want to play chess, you play chess with them, right? And if they want to get good at chess, you take them to chess class. But you don't tell them they should play chess. And if they do start playing chess, you don't tell them they should play chess more. And what's happened is my oldest son, the one who reads all the time, has become this super intense student. And I left this morning, whenever I left, 6 o'clock in the morning to come down here, or wherever I went, 6 o'clock in the morning. And he was already up studying, right? And he stayed up after I went to bed. He's up studying. And the middle one is a super focused soccer player. He trains harder than I do, right? And I'll go and I'll be like, I ran 15 miles or whatever. And he's like, okay, yeah, I ran 6 miles and I lifted weights and I trained 3 hours by myself at Dean Street and I played a pickup game with former Trinidadian professionals. I'm great. And then the younger one, who's 11, he's figuring it out, but he seems to kind of have both those things, sort of the intense athletic passion and success. And he is perhaps the most dedicated. I would bet my 11-year-old son, no one who reads The Atlantic more reads other things less. He only knows what's happening in the world from what we cover, which is complicated because we don't actually cover that much. He reads The Atlantic website beginning to end every day and nothing else. Even the folks who work at The Atlantic don't do that. We read the Times and the Post and we catch up. And so he has this sort of hilarious view of the world.
So just to give this its next natural step, if you asked either of our two sons or either of our two daughters-in-law or any of the 6 grandchildren who runs our family, Deb and me, they all would have the same answer instantly, which is Deb, of course. What do your sons, how does your wife think about the Thompson lineage as you have portrayed it and how she reckons with that with your children?
I think she really likes, we have a pretty split marriage on who does the work and who does the carpooling and who takes the kids. Certainly while I've been doing book tour and there are moments in my life where I have to travel a whole bunch and then the burden shifts on her. But, we have a deal. And with my running, I try very hard to make it fit into places where it doesn't interrupt with family life and where, it doesn't affect those things that matter more. I think she likes the example of the discipline, and I think that she's hyper-focused too, right? She was a professional modern dancer, and she's, assistant, dean of faculty at the New School. She's a very ambitious career and had a very ambitious physical life. So she understands, her dancing, kind of ended before my running did, but when we were in our 20s and 30s, she's training more than I was physically. So she understands that part of my life, and I think she thinks it's a good model that is set for the kids. I also think that she would, certainly prefer that I, did fewer events and maybe traveled less.
So we said this is a book about running. It's a book about your father. It's about fathers and grandfathers and sons and heritage. It's a book about enoughness. It also is, to a very striking degree, a book about pain and being able to go through pain. My analogy is the sport I loved best and was best at was tennis. And almost nobody, not even the people who are really good at tennis, talk about the pain of being a tennis player. The main theme you're having here is the pain you need to endure to be a successful runner. One of many quotes, the marathon, like so much else in life, is an event of small, imperceptive traumas that accumulate. Tell us how you think of the stoic discipline of pain, what you've learned about pain in your decade as a successful runner, what the rest of us should know about that, and how it informs the rest of your life.
Well, how to describe pain and the different forms of pain was also one of the hardest parts of the book, because there's so many different kinds of pain in running. One of the most interesting things that I've learned from running, and by really thinking about it, is that most pain is illusory, right? And it's not actually, when you run and you start to get fatigued and your shoulder hurts or your knee hurts, it's not because anything is going wrong in your shoulder or your knee. It's because of this very complicated process, which I almost think of as like there's a thermostat inside your brain, and it's measuring its fear of whether your body will lose homeostasis and whether you'll be pushed to a state that you can't sustain. And so if you go out and you're like, I'm going to run 15 miles, and it's a very hot day, your knee will start to hurt when you've gone 1 mile down Connecticut Avenue. If you would run the exact same steps, but you knew you're only going to run 3 miles and it's cool, your knee would not hurt, right? And nothing is happening to your knee either time. And so it's this idea called the central governor model, and it's that your brain is like, it's adjudicating these sort of all of these complex calculations that are determined whether you should hurt when you run. And once you realize that, it doesn't actually solve the problem. It doesn't mean that I can go like run an hour-and-a-half marathon, right? And just like go like gun it in the New York City Marathon. But it means that you have a different understanding of what's happening in your body, and it gives you a way of thinking about the pain and pushing it away. And like, actually, I've been training my 11-year-old soccer team in running. It's very fun. And I've like, first time we run there, they all get cramps. They're like, oh, we have cramps. And I was like, cramps are an illusion, which isn't quite true, but it's mostly true. Now they never get cramps, right? It's amazing. Like, not one of them ever gets a cramp. But it's not like they can run a 4-minute mile. So anyway, that's one element of pain.
I'm going to interrupt on that element of pain for a moment. My dad was a beloved small-town doctor. He believed also shake it off, et cetera. One time we were at a playground. I was about 10 years old, and there was a model fighter jet there. It was an Air Force base. And I jumped off it. And I said, oh, Dad, that's too far. And then jumped off, and I said, oh, my leg feels bad. I said, I'll shake it off. 3 days later, when I got to the hospital and had an X-ray, I had a broken leg. But so there are such. So how do you?
Well, right. So there are. Right, if you're running on Connecticut Avenue and you step on a nail, right, your foot does hurt, right? And like you have to. One of the things you have to do in the sport is you have to distinguish, right, between what is actual pain and injury, and what is just sort of your brain being afraid, right? And as you run more and as you learn more, I'm doing right now. I have like this thing is in my knee, right? Is it actually, like, do I actually have tendonitis and inflammation in my upper knee? Now, I've run enough to have a pretty good sense that I do have a little inflammation and tendonitis in my upper knee, and I need to deal with it the way I deal with inflammation and tendonitis in my knee before a race. But you figure out, is it happening on both sides? Is it happening in a place where it should be? And you understand the pain. So sometimes people ask me, like, I write in the beginning that I don't run with music. For some reason, like, there are these sentences in a book that become like totemic. Like, you don't run with music? No, I don't run with music because I'm trying to figure out what's going on with my knee, right? And like, I'm trying to like understand what's happening in my body when I run, so I can distinguish between the actual pain, breaking your leg, stepping on a nail, and just the illusory pain. And that's like part of the challenge of running.
One of many sentences I copied out. Remember, am I in pain because I'm tired or because I'm hurt? That's the question you're asking yourself. And just to divert from that for a second, when you look at sports that are causing people injury, I'm thinking of professional football. How do you think about this calculus of, we have to play through the pain as it applies to professional football now?
But professional football pain, I don't like. That's acute trauma. I mean, it's very different, because it's not like when a professional football player plays, it's not like the brain is, I mean, maybe there's some anticipatory pain, like you realize you're going to get mashed in the game, and so your knee hurts before the game. But I think it's a very different kind of pain, where it's not this slow, gradual buildup that you can have a conversation with. It's this like, your brain gets flattened and like pushed against the other side of your skull.
I'm going to ask you a non-running, non-family history question for a moment. You are the CEO of one of the major media organizations of this moment, of a long history in the U.S., but how should the rest of us have any hope about media meeting the moment in public life?
Well, I think
Talk about pain and playing through pain.
the media, a lot of it, some of the media, not all of the media, is meeting the moment. I think that, certainly we at The Atlantic, lots of other publications, there are folks on Substack, there's individuals, are not being cowed by threats by the government to shut you down, to put pressure on you. We at The Atlantic would be fully committed to continue to publishing everything. Like we are not complying with the policies at the Pentagon, right? We're just going to go and hire more Pentagon reporters, and we'll report on the Pentagon from outside the Pentagon. If you're only allowed to be a stenographer inside the Pentagon, well, then we're not going to do that. We'll go and write true, accurate stories, and we'll just be a little bit harder. So that's one element. So if the question is meeting the moment in the sense of there's a government in power right now that would like the press to not question it, how do you handle that? That moment we can meet. The second question, though, is can you meet the moment with AI, right? Can you run a successful and sophisticated media publication in an age where the open internet dies? Because Google absorbs all search into itself. There's so much AI-generated content throughout the web that it's impossible to find high-quality content. That's a harder question, and that is we can be definitive and defiant, and we know we can stand up to all the threats that come to us from any authoritarian instincts of the current government. As for AI, that's a huge strategic question of how you build direct relationship with readers, how you set your bets and leverage yourself so that even if AI does end up wiping out the open internet, you still have a business model that can survive. And that is how we've been directing our strategy the last couple of years.
So for run-of-show reasons here, I'm going to ask two more questions, and then I'll invite everyone, you can start queuing up at the microphones now. One of the questions, Nick, goes back to running. You'll be glad to hear. You have part of the intricate structure of your book is profiles of a number of runners, whose stories. And one of these runners is with us now. This is Suprabha.
Here, this will be fun. This will be fun. Look around the room.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
And try to identify which person is the greatest long-distance ultra runner of all time by some measures. Just look at all the people and try to guess who it is.
What's the name?
And it's not Nick and it's not me.
Right, and this person for 9 consecutive years won a race that is 3,100 miles long around the same block in Queens. All right, so now, Suprabha, where are you?
Ta-da.
So in the book, I write about 5 different runners who exemplify really powerful things in life, all of whom my life has connected with. And Suprabha, I lived on Broad Branch and Brandywine with my dad. I lived right here, and I guess right there. And Suprabha ran the Transcendence, Perfection, Bliss of Beyond store right on Connecticut Avenue that I went by every day. And then she ran and won this incredible race in Queens that I started following, watching, and became obsessed by. So she won it 9 years in a row.
Is there anything you'd like to say to Nick? You can just say thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, actually, Nick came by my store a number of times, and it was like he was interviewing me, but I didn't realize exactly what was happening until I said, I might put a little chapter about you in my book. Okay. But I find him very inspiring in the way he goes about his work and his running and keeps everything kind of spinning around. And and I'm just grateful I could do so much running, ultra distance running in my life. And I encourage people to do longer races because it can be like a pilgrimage. If you go, like Nick is talking about the brain and the, letting go of the pain, stuff like that. A lot of it is about that. Like what I would try to do is go inside my heart, which is where I meditate. And that's kind of the source of my running. My teacher was, who came up with the idea of a 3,100-mile race, had a whole philosophy of self-transcendence. And this is basically going beyond your best and trying to continue that. And if you can't run anymore, then you can do it in other ways. So anyway, that Nick seems to have kind of mastered that concept in his life. So,
Thank you so much. This may be the rare DC gathering where we have two actual world record holders in different categories. Nick is the world record holder in one category, and so congratulations. So, Nick, the last question I'll ask you is, what should I have asked you so far that I haven't?
The thing you should have asked me that nobody has was Roger Hansen, and you did. So you've got it under control.
So we can turn it over to
Turn it over
our
to the
colleagues
audience.
here. Yes, sir.
Okay, great.
Please don't take this as a negative question, but isn't it true that most long-distance runners need knee replacement surgery at some point?
No, I think long distance running strengthens your knees. Actually, yeah. I mean, I'm 50 years old. I've got no physical problem. I write in the book that you get old when you stop running. You don't stop running because you get old. I really do believe that, like, when you run, right, you are putting pressure on your knees, right, and you can go too far and you can injure it, right, and there can be a moment where you do get inflammation in your knee, and then you come back and you get chronic inflammation. But you're not going to tear your meniscus. You're not going to tear your ACL. And the whole time you're doing it, well, you're strengthening your quads. You're strengthening your hips, right? You're doing certain other exercises that improve your mobility. You know, running is basically force put into the ground multiplied by efficiency of movement divided by mass. And if you're focused on those things, and you're focused on efficiency of movement, and you're focused on, like, keeping your mass in control, which you can do, then those things are all good for your knees. So yeah. I'm going to be a partisan, and I'm pro long distance running for your knees.
And I'll say I've run 1,000th as much as Nick, but for a longer number of years, and I've never had any knee issues. I hurt my back badly in tennis, but not from running.
It can do all kinds. It can, like, make you self-absorbed, selfish, and obnoxious, right? But, like, I don't think it hurts your knees.
Nick, I knew your father back in the day. In fact, the very day that I first met your father, I also met you.
Oh my gosh.
This was the summer of 1986.
Okay.
You have already touched on some of your father's self-destructive behavior. I did want to add what you know and many others here perhaps know, which is your father could also, back in the day, have an extremely powerfully positive effect on people. I was one of those people, and meeting your father in my formative years back in DC was one of the best things that happened to me. Here's my question. His published work, or one of his published works, was called The Price of Achievement. I'm curious to know, against the backdrop of your own achievements, what's your personal take on this idea of the price of achievement, and what can you tell us by way of contrast about what your own father had in mind when he titled his memoir, The Price of Achievement?
You know, it's... thank you for saying that about my dad. And he was a professor at Fletcher for 30 years, and we would host these incredible parties. Some of you probably went to them at his house down on Broad Branch Road. And he would, like, his former students would come, and they were, like, government officials, and they were CIA operatives, and, they were, the ambassador to Thailand. Like, just think, and it's an amazing group of people who adored him, right? And we'd have these fabulous parties together. The funny thing about my dad's book, The Price of Achievement, is that it's a really interesting book, right? And my note to him was, take every page you've written about my mother and burn it, and then keep the rest of the book and it'll be fine. But my second note was that the title didn't make any sense, because I never really understood the title. Like, his struggle in life wasn't that, he always used to say, he whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make promising, right? And that was the Roger Hansen and the Scott Thompson issue, right? Like, winning the Rhodes Scholarship, being photographed for, Life magazine, that puts a mark on you that makes people want to destroy you, makes it very hard to live up to expectations, and creates wonderful opportunities, but also creates burdens. So I never understood what he really meant with the price of achievement. I was like, Dad, what? And he would always, I can't even remember what his argument was for that book. But he wrote that book on, like, a 2-week bender. And he had just been rejected from the job as director of the Peace Institute. And he believed that he had been rejected because he was gay and because the Peace Institute refused to have a director who was openly gay. And so the best parts of that book, and this is, he publishes this in 1994, right? And so, gay civil rights historians will be able to place 1994 better than I can, but that was a moment where it was actually a pretty powerful thing. The argument that he was making, Andrew Sullivan and others were making at the same time, was the more people who are out in more places, the better off things are. And so my dad was outing people. He outed Senator David Boren in that book, which was somewhat controversial and later data suggests was probably accurate. And so he was, the book was about outing. It was about standing up. It was about being gay. Like, that was the best part of the book. As for the title, I don't know exactly what he meant with it.
Thanks very much.
Can I do one direct follow-up of that, please, and then have more questions? So it's because you write about it in the book. You and your father went to the same prep school at Andover. You went to the same college, Stanford. And you talk about the fact that you did not get a Rhodes Scholarship, as he had, and that this was liberating to you. Say more about that.
That was one of the weirdest things in the... So when this sounds so douchey, and I'm sorry, but when I was a kid, my dad was like, you're going to go to Andover, you're going to go to Stanford, you're going to win a Rhodes Scholarship just like me, right? And it was like a given, right? And then I went to Andover, went to Stanford, then was vice president of the student body, had really good grades, and then I didn't get the Rhodes Scholarship. I was like, wait, what? And my memory, right? So Nick at this age, what did it feel like to not win, right? And obviously, they picked 32 kids. How on earth can you possibly think you're going to win that? If lightning strikes, you win, right? If you are really well prepared and lightning strikes, you win. Anyway, all I remember is being sad. And then I was going back through all my old emails, which I've saved my whole life. And there's an email that I sent to my then, I guess she wasn't even then my girlfriend, my then correspondent, who then became my girlfriend and is now my wife, where I was like, I am liberated. The monkey of my father's expectations on my back are gone. I was like, I don't remember feeling that, but I did write that, so I must have felt that. Yes, sir. Also, Jim was a Rhodes Scholar.
But that's not why I asked.
No, I know, but I thought I would point that out just to make you feel a little awkward on stage.
I can confirm that it's.
But you can confirm that
it's a complete roll crapshoot. There are any number of people there. You could have chosen 20 other sets of 32 people from any given year, and they'd be just.
But also, it's an amazing thing to get. And it's a burden. And I'm sure, you having observed your classmates, for some people it was a gift and for some people it was a curse.
For later discussion, yes. Yes.
Nick, I wanted to get your thoughts on, as a middle-aged runner, what are the keys to enjoying and succeeding in running, the things one should do, and what are the things one should avoid doing to avoid injury, not enjoy it anymore.
So it really depends. I think I was blessed a little bit that I had not succeeded as a young runner, so I didn't have to race against a very fast 22-year-old. My friends from the college team, they all ran 2:17 marathons, so it's not fun for them to go and run 2:45s, right? But if you skip that stage where you're really good, it's more fun when you're in middle age. Your body does change, right? It takes much longer to get going. Right? Every year, my first mile on a 10-mile run gets slower. The other 9 stay more or less the same. The first one gets dramatically lower. So you have to warm up and you have to get your body going. There's something about the way the engine works, right? The recovery process takes longer. It takes a lot longer for injuries to heal, right? So I'm much more deliberate about my diet than I was even 5 years ago, in part because it's one of the few ways you can kind of speed up this process that is getting worse. And then I think two things that are important. One is just you've got to keep doing it, right? And you've got to figure out, I'm blessed that I fit into the structure of my day. I run to the office, I run home from the office, I run to the office, I run home from the office, right? And it's locked into that part of the day, and it's an efficient way to do it. As I told Jim yesterday, I finished a board meeting at 5:30. I hadn't run during the day. I had a flight at 7, so I changed my shorts and I ran to DCA and just ran to Terminal 2, went up the escalator and went into pre-check. So you've got to just figure out how to. My wife was like, why are you in your shorts? I was like, I ran to the airport. She's like, well, that's on brand. But figuring out how to fit it into your life. And then the other thing that I think is useful is finding new challenges, right? Because I had this with the marathon. in my like the last 3 or 4 years where I ran this great marathon. I ran a 2:29 marathon. I'm super excited at 44, and it's like, wow, that's awesome, right? And then I get stuck, right? COVID happens, and then I'm running like 2:35, 2:37, and like 2:35, 2:37 is great. It's not that fun to run when you've run a 2:29, right? And so then I started doing other stuff, right? And I ran this 50K. I started running 50 milers. I ran this 100K out in the mountains. Superbo told me to think of myself as a child bounding through the woods, which was very helpful advice. And so you find different things. So find different races. Like, you know, if you've been running marathons, run 5Ks. If you run 5Ks, run marathons. If you don't like either of those, run the Javelina 100. Run Comrades.
Yes.
Hi, Nick. I ran Chicago a couple of weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And it got hard, as you remember, marathons do. And maybe because it was such a hard race, I really leaned into the spectators. There were over 1 million people kind of holding up signs, saying they loved me, saying that I could do it. And kind of against the backdrop of this, you know, polarized kind of uncivil moment we find ourselves in, I just had this feeling of, you know, they were cheering for you no matter how fast you were and what you looked like, what race, what gender you were. It really felt like no one was outside of love that day in Chicago. And so my question is, you know, a lot of what I've taken from your writing is about how running kind of helps you get the best out of life and elevate yourself. But what is it about running that you think helps other people kind of be their best selves? People cheering on people they will never know and will never see again, but telling them that, you know, they can finish the race.
So I love that you said that. Marathons are the coolest races in the world, right? Because if you like to play basketball, you don't actually get to play in the same game as LeBron James, right? But in a marathon, you start in the same race as Eliud Kipchoge, and you run on the same road, and you're all going down there. And so people are like watching Eliud Kipchoge, and then they're watching you, right? And so it's this amazing spectator sport. And it also runs counter to two things in society, right? It runs counter to this like polarization, and we, you know, don't like our neighbors, and we don't get to be with each other. You know, these major city marathons, everybody comes out and everybody's excited. And some of them are excited because their friends are running. Some of them are excited because they've had a bunch of mocktails. And some of them are just excited because it's just beautiful to watch. Like, I hope everybody does this at some point. Just go and watch, like, the last hour of a marathon and the people coming through. And you know that everybody has some story, some reason they're there. And, like, maybe they're there because, you know, they lost a bet, and maybe they're there because, you know, they're raising money for their mother's Parkinson's, and maybe they're there because, like, they lost a kidney last year and they set this challenge and now they're doing it, right? And you don't know, but you know they have like some kind of important story. And then the other thing that I love about it, like, so many more people run marathons, like I don't know, hundreds of people ran the New York Marathon back when my dad did. And like, there are 50,000 people who are going to run it on Sunday, and another 500,000 who applied, and they're going to run for, I don't know, the average time is 4.5, 5 hours, at a time where like everybody's on TikTok, right? And like we're like, it's like total counter to, it's like this world where the world is moving. And look at ultras, like the number of people who are going out, and they're not all running like Super Bowl, they're not running 3,100 miles, but the number of people who are running these 100-mile races, and just, I'm going to do this thing for 24 hours straight, is amazing in an era where we always complain about the amount of attention that people have. So it is a truly beautiful, wonderful thing, and everybody, you know, if you're in New York this Sunday, go cheer the marathon. You know, Marine Corps was last weekend here in Washington. And the other thing people are realizing is that everybody can run one, right? Anybody can run, most everybody can run a marathon.
Yes.
Thanks for coming to DC to talk about the book. You, in the recent like CBS Sunday morning news segment, it ended on like almost a somber note where you said like eventually you won't be able to run anymore, and then you'll have to find like some other way to hold on. And I'm just curious what you meant by like hold on, and if like there are things you can hold on to, like family or like, you know, other things in life that would help. You know, maybe at a day where you can't run anymore.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. The way this segment was set up was like my dad, when I turned 40, he was like, you know, congratulations, things look great for you, but every man's life falls apart at 40. I'm sorry, it happened to me, happened to my dad. And he posted this on Facebook where there are like 70,000 followers. I'm like, Dad, like, you maybe like DM me? Like, but you know, one of the theses of the book is that I've held on to running as a way to hold on to discipline, right? And so that my life won't fall apart, you know, in ways that map some of the things that happened to my dad. So the CBS segment was kind of asking, like, what happens when you can't run anymore? Because at some point you can't. Like, at some point, like, it might be next year, right? Rate I'm going, it might be this weekend, right? Where I can't, like, actually run a marathon, or I can't, what will I do? And so at that point I'll need a way to be outside. I do think that running gives me a great chance to be in nature. I do think that people need to be outside, right? They need to be outside, and being in motion outside is particularly good. Fortunately, I can walk and I can hike, right? Or I can bike or ride. But I think that the bigger thing you're getting at is, like, I've built a life where I have a really important family life. I care a ton about my job, and then I have an intense hobby. And I don't know what will happen if, like, I physically wasn't able to do this intense hobby. My guess is that running kind of displaced music in my life. I was a musician, street musician. I made more money in my 20s as a musician than a journalist, which was mostly because I was such a bad journalist. But I wonder whether, like, that will come back. I wonder whether if running is no longer part of my life, I will replace it with, like, walking, hiking, bicycling, or whether I'll replace it with, like, playing guitar. What I hope is that I don't replace it with, like, drinking alcohol.
So I think we have time for one or two more questions. Maybe if you each could ask your question, then Nick can answer them both. And I'm going to tag a very short one on that too. So yes, please, the questions.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. Thanks, Nick, so much. Really enjoyed this. I've also found endurance sports as a way to process profound change and grief, and now appropriately, given current events, training for my first ultramarathon.
Mazel
At the
tov.
encouragement of friends who are also furloughed federal employees right now. I'm curious, in the arc of your career, I think of programs like the Truman Scholarship that often start with people wanting to do good in really kind of tangible, specific ways related to, like, policy, law, and governance. But your path really suggests writing and journalism are equally powerful forms of service. So I'm wondering, you touched on this briefly about how about the Atlantic will cover the Pentagon, et cetera, but how do you see the role of writers, editors, and readers in strengthening the civic fabric at a time when it feels so frayed? And what role can they play in rebuilding trust and shared purpose in civic life today?
So hold that in your mind for a moment. We'll hold the other question. You'll do them both. Yes. I will remind you if you forget. Yes. And
Jim and Nick, thank you so much for doing this. The three of us here are with the Comrades Ultramarathon in South Africa, which is the equivalent of Boston. This is the Hurricane. That is the Mad Brazilian. And I'm the world's slowest runner ever. Between the three of us, we've done 143 marathons and ultramarathons. But that's not the point. When I met Nick, I was so happy because of his story about running. And that gets to my real question. And the question was, what do you do if you can no longer run? I can no longer run, but remember the kid in high school who played football and he kept going back? There is another chapter.
Yeah.
And the three of us are involved in the other chapter, and that is Comrades was Nelson Mandela's marathon.
Wow.
And we're going to celebrate our 227th anniversary. We've got 84 countries running this year.
Wow.
But the point is not
Yeah.
that. There is another chapter. And the interesting thing about this, have any of you seen the movie Invictus?
Yep.
The cool thing about Mandela and us, is that I've been to South Africa 23 times. You've been in Comrades, done it 20 times. It's one of the few things that really bring people together.
Yep.
And that is my dream for the 2027. And I'm also hoping that this fellow will run Comrades. So I'm sorry I went on, but I mainly wanted to thank you.
So Comrades in the next step.
So
and
to
also
answer that
service.
question, I
Yes.
am going to run Comrades. Thank you very
Whoa,
much.
Wow, yay, yay.
I've always wanted to run Comrades. My training partner, the guy I run with the most, I just ran it this past year. Two of my closest training partners have just run it and have nothing but wonderful things to say about it. It's like the iconic marathon. I just have to negotiate the visa with my wife and children because my children only want me to run races for whatever reason in Japan because they really want to go to Tokyo. So they're super keen on the Tokyo Marathon, and Brazil because they want to play with Brazilian soccer teams. So we'll sort through that. On the service question is interesting, right? So I see there's some other Truman Scholars here. I won this Truman Scholarship, which is supposed to send you into life of public service, and that was what I thought I was going to do. I was going to go work for the government, and it didn't work out that way. But I do think that journalism plays a really important role in helping hold America together. And if journalists can hold power to account, publish truthful stories, publish real stories, nonpartisan stories. Hold power to account, whether it's Republican, whether it's Democrat, whether you personally like the person, whether you personally don't like the person. Praise them, even when you disagree with them on most things. But if you can do that and you can provide good information, like the Founding Fathers were very clear that journalism is extremely important for American functioning well. And one of the reasons our democracy has lasted so long is because we do have free speech, we do have freedom of the press, and we do have a very strong, media that does not carry water for the government and will often push against the water, against the government. And I think that's incredibly important. And so, I've gone through this interesting transition in my life where I was an editor and then I was a writer and now I'm a bureaucrat, right? But the reason I made this transition was a realization that the thing I'm particularly good at is setting business models for serious journalistic institutions, right? I am better at that than I am at writing. And so, when the opportunity came up to be CEO of The Atlantic and the possibility to can I help figure out a business model that will help make this publication founded by Ralph Waldo Emerson that has published 19,000 stories written by Jim Fallows. If I can make the business model of this publication sustain for another 5-10 years, then I've done something really good for this country. And my grandfather Nitz would be really proud of me. My dad would be really proud of me. My mother would be proud of me. So that was why I said yes to the job.
We've had an hour's exposure to the sensibility and the excellence that Nick Thompson brings to the world around him. The rest is in the book. I encourage you to line up, have Nick sign your book. And so thank you. And join me in thanking Nick.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you.